So we will start our discussion today. We will start our discussion today, and Commissioner Bondima, I want to have you tee up this conversation around our board strategic goals, in particular, goal number 1, the literacy discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Richardson. Appreciate it. Back in, I think it was April or May, we had a lengthy discussion about our strategic goals. And one of the areas that we wanted to continue discussion on was the literacy goal. And I've had quite a conversation with our Chief Jones, Teresa Jones, and we've been talking about it. So what we would like to do today, and I'll get a little bit more into it after Chief Jones do her presentation, but I would like to, after her presentation, I would like to open the floor for conversation with our board members and get our opinion and comments. But the discussion will be around specifically the amount of students, and it's already listed in your agenda, amount of students in K through 8 meeting on exceeding their growth targets in reading from 19% to 40%. And we want to have quite a conversation in reference to that. And once Chief Jones, she completes her presentation, we will have comments from the board members and just make a decision about how we want that goal to move forward. I'd like to move the conversation to Chief Jones.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Bondima, and good afternoon, everyone. So before we get started, I want to first thank Commissioner Bondima for her leadership of the Strategic Planning Committee and for the opportunity to continue to engage with the board around actualizing the goals that the board has adopted. So as I understand it, really for today, I want to start with just a little bit of a brief reminder around what the board had asked us to consider when it comes to the purpose of the goals and what that might mean as it relates to the literacy goal in particular. And I want to acknowledge that, since we first shared these goals with the board and the public in March, there has been an opportunity for the community to provide feedback. And we want to be able to have the board consider what that feedback might mean as we move forward with the communication plans as it relates to the goals. So by way of background, this first slide just indicates, that the board does indeed recognize that goals can serve multiple purposes. And as it relates to the purpose here in city schools, we wanted our district goals to support accountability, but we also want to make sure that the goals are mobilizing the community. And that really recognizes that this is an all hands on deck endeavor to ensure that our students are successful. So when we think about the improvements that we want to make in student achievement, how we want to ensure that students are able to achieve their post-secondary goals, and then also how they are prepared to be engaged as community contributors as they move forward from city schools as graduates. For purposes of today, again, for purposes of community feedback and the board's response, I first want to acknowledge that we did receive some very important feedback from the community as the board shared the goals. And again, while there were 3 goals that were shared, the one we're going to focus on today is the literacy goal, because there was some really important feedback, particularly as it relates to whether or not it was effectively communicating the way that we intended. So what I want to do is just highlight the summary of the goals, and this is really what led to that level of feedback. So when it comes to the literacy goal, what we wanted to focus in on is looking at how well students are achieving when it comes to reading. So this looks at their reading and English language arts proficiency. The idea is that for purposes of district goal measurement, we would be using the state assessment data and looking at how students are performing on what is known as the MCAP, or the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program assessment, in the particular grades listed here, which are grades 3 through 8 and grade 10 when it comes to high school, and thinking about what that means by the year 2026 and 27. So again, what really generated the feedback was the fact that there was a target listed here of 40%. So that's essentially what we want to talk about today is how do we, sort of think about that? Is that the best way for us to communicate the goal? But in order to understand where that goal came from, we wanted to do a little bit of a refresher about the baseline number, that 19%, and how we actually got at the 40%. So that's what I want to sort of walk you through here today. So let's see, where is it? Sorry, I think there's actually a slide missing out of this version of the deck. If you give me just 1 second, I am going to switch over and pull up another presentation. 1 second. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can get this one up. Okay. All right. I am just about there. Give me 1 second. And let me just get to the appropriate slide. This was from our conversation back in March. The beauty of technology, when it works for you, it's a wonderful friend. When it doesn't, it makes things challenging. So I apologize for the delay in the technical difficulty. Okay, here we go. We're getting there. Okay, I think I'm almost there. Here we go. There we go. Okay, again, apologies for the technical difficulty. So when it comes to that 40%, the reason that we chose to propose the 40% is we wanted to have a goal that would be considered a SMART goal, which means is that it was giving some level of consideration to our historical performance. But we also recognize that we're in the midst of recovery from the pandemic, and we recognize that we wanted to be able to accelerate the rate of improvement versus where we were prior to the pandemic. So for by way of background, we wanted to make sure folks had some understanding around how we performed in this particular area prior to the pandemic. So what you see noted in that second bullet point under the context is that we actually had our highest proficiency rate on this particular state assessment in school year 18-19. And at that time, that proficiency rate was 19%. So it was showing the highest increase versus the prior year, which was at 2 percentage points. And then as we looked over the history of the district's utilization of the assessment, that average increase was 1.6 percentage points. In addition to that, we also, for the first time in response to the pandemic, had an early administration of a state assessment. So last fall, there was an MCAP assessment given pretty much to serve as a proxy for the fact that students did not take the typical spring assessment in the prior spring. And looking at the performance for the English language arts assessment, the proficiency rate was at 16%. So again, it does obviously reflect some level of impact from the pandemic, as the state did see across the board that there were decreases in proficiency in mathematics as well as in ELA. So that was not out of the norm. But it does indicate that we have even further ground to cover when it comes to recovery and where students might be by the year 26-27. So as it relates to that, we had extensive conversation with the board about the district's plan. So what are we doing in order to recover in response to the pandemic? And we had discussion about the efforts related to the blueprint, as well as the recovery plan known as Reconnect, Restore, Reimagine. That's the R3 abbreviation that's noted there, recognizing that there are considerable investments of resources that are coming into the district to support academic recovery, and that we are strategically utilizing those resources in order to not only accelerate the rate of improvement in student performance, but also recognizing that historically we've been under-resourced, and that recovery effort actually overlaps in some ways with the influx of resources under Kerwin, where the state funding model will now bring in additional resources to the district that will actually help us sustain the level of improvement that we are working towards achieving. So based on those considerations of the context, when we talk with the board about what a target might look like, we sort of land on the 40%. And so while 40% is a little higher than what would be your linear rate of improvement based on where we have been historically, it was intended to acknowledge that there has been, intentionality around strategic efforts to accelerate the rate of improvement, and that there was some communication value, if you will, and being able to talk about we're doubling the percentage of students that are proficient relative to where we were prior to the pandemic. And so what I want to acknowledge here is that when we've had this conversation publicly with the board and members of the community, we're able to sort of reflect on that, and that initial take of it, we were working towards that being the way we talk about this. So doubling that rate of improvement. Through the community feedback, we recognized that community members actually took away something very different when they heard this. And so I want to share what was relayed as relates to the feedback and give board members an opportunity to sort of reflect upon that for us to have discussion about where we go from here. Because we do have some options in sort of how we talk about the goal going forward. So the main point of feedback was the fact that this seemed to not indicate the high expectations that we have for our students. Because of course, the converse of having 40% of students proficient means that there are still 60% of students that are not. And particularly for community members to feel that that was something that they were really excited about and could be mobilized by, they gave the real hard talk feedback to say, it doesn't sound like we're doing right by our students in that regard, and that we should be setting higher expectations, and however we talk about this literacy goal should communicate that. So one of the things I did want to put on the table before I turn it over to board members is that there are ways that we might be able to talk about this number differently aside from the doubling. We have seen some examples in other places where they just talk about the increase. So as an example, instead of referring to the 40% being sort of the target, one way we could consider talking about this is that, we are increasing, by 21 points, the percentage of students that are. So I just put that out there to acknowledge that we recognize that while this language might be somewhat challenging, we did want to be careful about recognizing where we have been and acknowledging that there was some stretch reflected when we discussed the target of 40%. So I think I'm going to sort of pause there. Commissioner Bondima, I think that gives the background that you were asking for me to provide. So I'll turn it back to you now to see if you'd like to say something further before you turn it over to the board members.
Yes, thank you so much, Chief. We've had a lengthy discussion about this percentage. I really want to pass it over to the board, but to have a lengthy discussion about it, because my concern personally is I'm looking at percentages doubling the percentage from 19% previously. I think you said 16%, and doubling it to 40%. It seems to me that firstly, we need to look at how historically we've moved up, and doubling up even though we've had the pandemic could set us up for failure, in my opinion. And I'm not we have our educators on the board that would have a conversation about that. But in my opinion, we don't want to set us up in a situation without looking at how we've done in previous years, even before the pandemic, and double up to 40% and find that after X amount of years, we do not reach that goal, because doubling up, it might be a problem. And some groups would like for us to even go higher. And I disagree with that. And I know that politically it looks wonderful at some point that we go 40 or more, but I think that we have to evaluate through this process in previous years. And I know that we have more resources to reach, possibly to get 40%, but I don't think that we need to put ourselves out there and set the system up to look at 40% and then we do not reach that goal. But I want to open it up to the board because you all have different comments about this 40% or more or even less. I think at one point it was 30%. I'm not sure if that's the best number, but I think that we need to look at some studies from our previous years to see how we have moved up the percentage ladder. And I'd like to open it up to the board and get your opinion.
Dr. Bondima, you have Commissioner Sally in the boardroom, and then Commissioner Chenya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, I appreciate the really hard work that it takes to come up with goals. And I know there's no lack of effort in terms of thinking about how we formulate goals that are both responsible and responsive, and at the same time, holding really high standards for all of our children. I think one of the things that, when I joined the board, I had to think about is the difference between how we talk about a long-term target, that achievement target, versus how we look at incremental growth year over year. And I think that gives us a different barometer to look at those numbers and a way to reset based upon what we're learning about the factors that impact our world. So, for example, if the pandemic takes a turn for the worst, or if we have something else that comes along that is going to prevent testing. And I do agree that kind of looking at these factors that have come along are super, uber important. But I think the bigger success story is looking at how well annually are we moving the needle in student achievement and student growth versus that long-term target that we may need to reset over time. And so it's something that I as we're looking at comparable systems out there, we're looking at how state policy works here in Maryland and nationally. There's a lot more emphasis in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act on the actual growth targets than the long-term proficiency target. So I just want to share those thoughts as we consider how to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I
I
can't
think
see whose hand is up. Then so
this is Linda,
oh,
and I'm sort of following up with Commissioner's previous comments, because I think one of the questions that I have, and it's I don't know if we can get some information in terms of what has happened this year, given that we have put some additional dollars and we've had a strategy in place. And I know our previous discussion, we did not have some of that data. So for me, I would like to see, at least, as our first year of attempting to really move into this additional support for students, what that has really shown for us, because I think that might help us in terms of determining what that trajectory might be. But I also do agree that looking year to year incrementally is very important.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Roberts' hand is up.
Thank you, Commissioner Bondima, and hello, everyone. I think I would be mirroring a couple of the same sentiments as Commissioner Sally and Commissioner Chenya here. I have a couple thoughts, one of which is I completely agree around having the interim goals established so that we're seeing the progress for each year. But then I also think about, to Commissioner Chenya's point, the supplemental services like tutoring and the extra dollars that were applied this specifically towards addressing some of these deficits that we knew that students were coming back into the building with. But to that point, I also think, and I just want to list it in this space, is that this is inherent in authentic conversation with the larger stakeholder group that has to actually be had around where our students lie. So as we're having a discussion around what the appropriate target is, this is also a very timely to have the open conversation around what the ask of our larger community constituency partner group is. And so I just wanted to make sure that didn't get lost in the conversation, because as we're thinking about what the target is and how we can adjust and how we're going to look at it moving forward, it's still, you know, the actual outcomes are what they are. And so I just wanted to lift that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Brooks?
Yeah, so I just wanted to just add that I think like there's a need to see more outcome data for like the interventions that we're using. And I feel like I know I've asked for like, what are the outcomes of the strategy that we're using and how they're moving things forward. And oftentimes we get sort of output data, but not outcomes data. And so I think whether or not the communication of the thing I'm less concerned about, but I'm actually worried about whether or not we're actually doing our job. And maybe we need to be prioritizing even more attention and focus for our literacy approaches, and then have literally quarterly conversations about how well we're doing to move towards that, and sort of what measures are we actually using to improve the outcomes of our students. And so I guess for me, I feel like we need better metrics and monitoring in order to sort of gauge whether or not our strategies are actually sufficient in moving the needle for our students. And whether it's 60% or 80%, I want 100%. And I also know that without any metrics, we're going to be having this conversation 3-5 years down the road. So I'm less concerned about the communication aspect of this and more about like, okay, what are we actually doing and what are the outcomes?
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bondima, you have Commissioner Sally, and then I also want to jump in as well.
Oh, okay, because I'm sorry, I can't see the hands. I don't know why.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sally?
Yep, thank you. So I appreciate both just the prior two comments that we got and similar, just kind of building on something that Commissioner Roberts mentioned, but thinking about our subgroups of children, right? So one of the most important tenets of school improvement is kind of breaking down that data to understand how well our children are performing and how we target our school improvement efforts. And so I think once we have goals that we feel that we all can coalesce behind, it's then therefore the action that's required by the system, that's developed by the system, that's developed at the school level, also developed at the state level, so that we can start to look at how we can better support our schools and our educators, and making sure that they have the resources to implement those school improvement plans with fidelity on an annual basis. Thank you.
And this is Commissioner Richardson. So I remember, because I was a part of this process too. So if Teresa is still with us, maybe you can chime in and help me out. But I remember that you had lifted up all of the various ways in which you would be tracking this. And so I think this conversation, just to give some context, came to this meeting today because we voted on these goals and then we went public with them. And this was the one goal that in a meeting with parents and the community, there was pushback here, right? And so I certainly wanted to bring this goal back to the table because it's less about the tracking. I mean, I know that's important. We've got some smart people that's going to do that, and the board's going to work with our staff to make sure we track. But it's about the perception of the 40%. So if we could talk a bit about that as a board, right? Because I sat in the meeting where community members said, it just feels like you all don't have high hopes for our kids when they see 40%, right? And so we know with all of the work that Chief Jones is doing, and she's really made the case for why we landed on 40. I think the conversation today, or at least I'd like to shift the conversation a bit to be one of, is this the number that feels good to stand behind when we're talking about our young people and literacy, right? So let's just kind of skip the tracking for just a moment, because we're going to get there. It's going to happen. We'll be a part of how that's tracked. And it is happening already. And the disaggregation and all of that is happening. It's about the perception of this goal going live. And remember, we wanted to use these goals as a rallying cry, right, to get all of the city involved in helping to move our young people forward. So I would just like to get some impressions on that, because that was my takeaway when I was in a community meeting talking about these goals. So that was takeaway. Commissioner Chenya?
I'm really having a hard time with a single goal of target of 40% when everything that we're doing from the legislation and the guidelines that we're moving forward is, even our own strategies are being very individual. So on the one hand, I could see looking at our particular groups and the needs of groups and saying how a group might grow. I'm having a hard time in putting all that together and saying what percentage that's going to be for the entire system. So that's just my dilemma right now. And it's not that I don't, that I don't have high expectations, but if we know, because we're putting extra resources into a particular group of students that have not had the kind of support that they need and where they are, then maybe 40% is that's what we want. But then we also know that we have another group of students that are in another place that we're giving different kinds of resources, and I'm expecting much more than 40%. So that's my dilemma.
That's fair. Thank you for lifting that up, because we have shifted to this individualized, right, learning pathways for our young people. So thank you. Commissioner Reed?
I may be wet, but I like the 40%. Reason I like the 40% is, sure, any target you make is aspiration. You're starting at 20%, and then you say 4 years from now, we want to make it 40%, or it's 3 years from now, whatever it is. 4 years from now, we go from 20% to 40% in 3 years. What you're talking about is a growth rate of 6% a year. Doesn't seem to be less than 6% a year. Doesn't seem to be a problem for me. I mean, and what's wrong with being aspirational? I mean, I think it's great. And also, it basically gets back to what the chair said. Looks like you want to be trying to do something. And I bring a kid into Baltimore City public school system, and you're telling me the number is 20%. My mindset is maybe I should be in a different school system. So, I mean, it's like you want to endear your population, which are the kids, to be the best they can possibly be. And I think 6%, 5% a year, that's not too painful. Yeah, it's 5%, less than 5% a year. It's not too painful. You're talking about 4+% for 4 years, compounded. That's going to get you 40%.
This is Bondima. Let me step in. Now, listening to what you're saying, Commissioner, maybe that's the way we have to present it to the public, the community. Maybe we should not say we're going to be at 40% in 3 years. Maybe we need to re-explain to them how yearly we will move up to 40%. Maybe it's the wording that we're concerned with. And maybe that's what I'm thinking right now. I'm thinking like some people in the community saying that we're going to jump from 20 to 40%. And maybe it's the way that we present it and come together and come and realize how we are going to word this to our community, this information. Because I have a difficult time, and I'm not sounding like everybody else, but I'm looking at it sitting in a meeting and we're saying that we have 19%, and then we're gonna, because we have resources, we're gonna be at 40%. And I'm agreeing with you. Maybe it's the way that we're presenting it.
I think, hey y'all, Commissioner Griffin. I I think for me, when I look at this, I'm hearing both sides, and I'm seeing how the wording is impacting the community. So if I was sitting and listening to the school district say, okay, right now only 19% of our kids are reading at or above grade level. And then, okay, we want to get that percent to 40% of our student population. It feels like the goal is a low bar. That's what it feels like. That's what it sounds like. Like, it sounds like all of our kids are not capable of doing that, so we won't set that goal. What we're really talking about here, though, is percent growth, right? So I think we need to think about how to word it and how to make sure that this goal is addressing, we're not only saying that 40%, thank you, of our student population in Baltimore City will read at or above grade level, and that's where we're stopping. We're also focusing our efforts on ensuring that all of our students have a certain amount of percent growth in their capabilities per year. And that's really what people want to hear. Like, are we growing? Are all of our kiddos growing in their literacy rates and their ability to read and comprehend? And so how are we making that a part of this goal too, and presenting that to the community? It's just the piece I wanted to add.
Good. You want to respond to that?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 second. Dr. Santelices is going to respond to that, but Commissioner Roberts is in the car and is trying to jump in. And so after the response, she can jump in next, and then Christian.
No, I just wanted to kind of affirm Commissioner Griffin's approach, because in this theme of like, how do we communicate? And a number of people have talked about growth. What was clear that night was what the 40% communicated to the parents, families, community members sitting there. And it did not communicate to them that we are looking for every child to grow. It did not sit with them that we had expectations for all of their children. And so when you said that messaging, part of why I had that reaction was you captured exactly what the pushback, because I was sitting right next to Chair Richardson, was. And it was painful for people, because it was this, so you really only think 40%, you had parents who were saying 40% ain't even a passing grade, right? How are you as the system going to target 40? And they weren't hearing it as doubling. They weren't hearing it as all young people are growing. They weren't hearing that our ultimate goal really is 100% of the kids. Like if you really want to put it down from where I'm sitting, like, why wouldn't we want 100%, give or take 10% for a rough year? That really should be our goal. And so that piece around the communication, and I will say, when I read, for example, LA Unified, I pulled their strategic plan off just because I had gotten something in the email, and I pulled it down. And when you look from a comms perspective, it communicates in their goals that idea of we're expecting growth, right? So if you look at LA Unified's target, their target wouldn't be that much different than our target based on where their kiddos are sitting right now. But the message you got from the goals that combined with the graphics and everything else were all these up arrows in red, which signals we want everybody moving. And it was the percentage growth that was communicated, not the target. So like my takeaway was the target is not communicating that. And so how do we get to the communication of that in a broad way while simultaneously, right? So the progress monitoring that folks were referring to is absolutely essential, and frankly is part of school-based goals. And the only reason we haven't reported out on it is because the data hasn't come back. And even the state has said that this school year needs to be a baseline year, because if you look at city schools tutoring, for example, in terms of wanting ROI, it didn't even all get started until January, because schools hit openings where kids and adults weren't even ready to focus again. And so we even postponed it. So from a pure research perspective, it's not even accurate. It's not even sound practice to say what's our ROI on what we've invested in. Because in some cases, it's only been 6 months. And any researcher will tell you, you're not looking at a systemic impact after 6 months, right, of partial implementation. But this idea of how do we communicate this expectation for the system to invest in the growth of all young people, to me, requires understanding of how people read it. And I left there, Jeanette was sitting next to me, and I was like, oh, this 40 is not landing like we thought this was going to land. I mean, people, you were there too, Commissioner. People were like, you are giving up on our kids, you're giving up on our system, you're doing this and this. Very different than when we're saying, let me talk to you about your child's growth. And this is what we're committing to across it. So I wanted to emphasize that, because that's why when I read the LAUSD, when I read Los Angeles, and I saw clear red marks, right? Red arrows up, expectation is that everybody is moving up. These are the indicators. And it said that but when I looked at, if they had communicated it like us, it would have been a similar communication, but they didn't. They communicated this spirit of growth. And that's kind of what I had in my head of how do we do that to be able to really mobilize the community.
Thank you. Commissioner Roberts? Commissioner, if you're speaking, we don't hear you. Are you muted? Still in the car? You don't see her in? Christian, why don't you ask your question and then we'll circle back.
Thanks. I'm just some piggybacking off of previous comments. First, just another observation I would have just from the family forum was that just also because it's new for people, that people didn't realize the board's gonna reconvene in 2026 and do another community process and redo goals. Just I think it's important to message this is a 5-year process, right? In 5 years, we'll see how we're done. We'll hopefully be past 40, we'll be blown it away, and then there'll be more goals. So I think it needs to be just messaged that this is a continuous goal setting process every 3 to 5 years that the board is going to be engaging in until you keep reaching 100. So that's, one possible way. And also just from my cohort and CGCS work, they do offer to help boards with practicing the monitoring sessions for these goals. So, there are certain kind of techniques and guidelines of how does a board really effectively talk about goals, figure out how we got there. So that's something, you're interested in. We can connect with CGCS, and we have a presenter coming later to kind of help the board. I know one of my other mentors from the project that she's in, from the cohort, and she's in, I believe, Cincinnati or Cleveland. And their board actually did like practice monitoring sessions before they went public for this. So that's something you all are interested in, just, throwing that out there.
This is.
I want to circle back to Commissioner Roberts. Are you there? Is she there yet? Okay, Commissioner Bondima, in the room, you have Commissioner Reed's hand up.
Okay.
And so I'll turn it back to you.
Commissioner, okay.
Dovetailing,
Go ahead, Commissioner Reed.
dovetailing on what Dr. S said,
Mm-hmm.
the run-of-the-mill parent would say, when you're talking about this 20%, when you're talking about this 40%, it's not my kids, because I know my kids can do better. So that gets back to what you two are saying from the standpoint of, we have this aspirational number of 40%, but it's really not aspirational. I think it's a good number. I wish it was higher, but I guess the point is we have something to point to in terms of growth. But if you talk to the run-of-the-mill parent, they're like, my kid's not that 20%. My kid's not going to be that 40%. He's going to be the 80%. So they have these, it may be hubris, but I'm sure every parent thinks their kid can do better. Or they would, like I said, speak with their feet and leave, go someplace.
Commissioner Roberts, did you want to speak? I think I saw you come in. Was that Commissioner Roberts?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So, to your point first, Dr. Santelises, and I think I shared this openly with you all before, like my son was in the 40%, the 60%. And so when I see the 40, what I think about is the effort around like having the individualized learning plans. And I think about the tutoring and I think about the targeted instruction, but knowing my son's baseline. A lot of our families don't know the baseline. So when we say, sorry, I'm out of breath. So when we say 40%, it's offensive if you don't know the baseline. And so if our families truly know where their students kind of lie, real honestly, in a very transparent way, knowing that incremental, I think Commissioner Reed said it like the 6%, what does 6% realistically look like for a child that is behind? And what does growth look like for that child, for my child? And so when you say 40%, it is, to Commissioner Chinya's point, if you don't know how to process that 40%, it's offensive. However, and I think my pushback here is 40% doesn't sound attractive, but is the question, do we raise it so that do we raise it so it's on the table that yes, we want 100% of our 78,000 plus kids to be on target, on grade level. But also, is that not the understanding of like that's the ultimate goal? That's the euphoric approach. That is what we're in the business of doing and delivering. But realistically, this is where we are. And so that's where I guess I just need some like that's my point of clarification of what is the ask.
So the ask from my frame and the board, this is the board's to wrestle with because these are the goals the board votes on, is not so much to change like the 40 to be 90, but to change how we frame it so that it communicates that growth is the focus. We're committing to growing. And part of why we're committing to growing is because going from 20 to 90% in 1 year is not operational in terms of mobilizing staff around, frankly, there are some schools that could probably do it, like with an all-out 24/7 effort, 365 days a year. But how do we chunk it? So part of why I use the LAUSD example is because their target is actually numerically fairly close to what we have, but they don't come close to saying 40% or 30%. They communicate it as growth because 30% growth actually communicates, I think in their case it was 30% growth over a 5-year period in their case communicates a large chunk of ground that people are committing to covering and not deflating. So I'm only pushing for consideration of a rewording of the target, not making the target, to your point, 90 when we know we're not going to get to 90 in 1 year. It'd be lovely if we could, but that I just wanted to clarify that was my consideration, my offer for consideration.
So, Dr. Santelises, I think that's back to what I was saying before, is the rewording. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me jump in, Commissioner Bondima. So one of the other things I think is really important to think about, also similar to the example that Dr. Santelises gave around LA Unified, is thinking about annually. I think our parents, our community, our stakeholders want to know how we step back annually when we have growth targets and look at that to understand if it's a 6% growth target, I'm making that up, how close we came to that. where are we falling short in the system? What are our resources like that we're putting in, and to shape up based on the context. So if we get a landfall of money or other resources that allow us to continue to target certain things, I think those things are important. But similar to what Christian shared, at the end of that 5-year period, it's that opportunity to step back and look at that target to see what is our new baseline, and then therefore what do we reset as well. So I think that communication piece is key, and making sure it shows like we're very committed to not only growth, but what we're going to do about that annually.
I'd like to add.
1 second. Commissioner Bondima, we have 4 minutes left in this discussion.
Okay.
And you have Commissioner McFadden who wants to add some
Okay,
comments.
and then we also have Commissioner Brooks. So could Commissioner McFadden, you want to go first? And Brooks, who's saying? I can't tell who's saying was up first.
Just very quickly, going back to Commissioner Roberts' point and Sally, and kind of the trend that we're hearing with everyone, I think it's critically important that not only does our community need to be aware of the baseline, right, where we came from, but the historical context as well, right? Like where we are, not just a baseline as a number, but just the historical, the generational, the cultural, the citywide inequity, like all of that kind of compounds into what we consider baseline. And I think it's important that our community is a part of that discussion, because to your point earlier, Roberts, it's going to take cross agencies, right? It's not just the school system that has to be responsible for a lift like this. All of us have to be involved in that as a city. And I think that is critically important. Folks always talk about how the school system is responsible for handling the ills of the world and all of society. And right now we have an opportunity to make sure that all of our stakeholders are engaged in this process, because it's going to be more than just us doing the work. It's going to be families, it's going to be business owners, it's going to be community organizations and members, it's going to be City Hall, it's going to be our legislators and elected leaders that join us and partner with us in the work. I just didn't want that to go unmentioned in this discussion. Dr. Brooks.
So yeah, so all I was going to add is that like I am fine with. So thank you, Dr. Teslisi, for explaining the context. That was really helpful. What you offer, I think it makes a lot of sense to me. I think so I'm fine with moving forward in that way. But what I would say is that we must keep that our internal metrics. So it might not need to be communicated that it's 40, but like we need to know as a board that it's 40, and that needs to be sort of very clearly stated, so that Dr. Santalisa, what the charge is. And so that we can both have accountability metrics in place, and then we can also communicate all of the things out to families and constituents on a much more regular basis than I think sometimes we see right now. So I'm good with sort of the growth aspect, but I want us as a board to be clear about what our number is, even if we don't communicate that publicly.
Right. Good. Thank you, Commissioner Brooks. What I would like to do, Commissioner Richardson, I would like to have the opportunity to call our strategic planning committee back together again as soon as we possibly can, because it is the summertime, I understand that, and review the comments and recommendations from everybody and come up with another solution for this, or maybe we have to move forward in another way. But I think that we need to have a lengthy discussion on everybody's opinion and bring it back to the board.
Thank you, Commissioner Bondima. Christian?
Sorry, just for my clarification. So what I'm hearing the ask is, from what I'm hearing of the ask, does it take a board action, right? I think the question is how it's being presented. Is that correct? Because I didn't hear anything that would require like a board action.
It's the communication of it.
Okay, so I mean, are we going to come back? Is there like a decision point? That's also, I didn't know what the decision or ask was, or if the consensus is everybody's fine with how it's presenting it differently. Just want to be clear.
Well, there's a little bit more than presenting it differently. I think that we need to have a discussion on presenting it and how we're going to present it to the community. And we would need the participation of Chief Jones and our committee and then bring it back to the board and present it to the board in maybe a different way and see how the board, feels about it. And then I don't know if we have to vote on it. I'm not sure if we make any
Great,
changes.
that is helpful. So I'll, work with Chief Jones and the staff and figure out we can come together, get some ideas about the messaging and other. So thank you.
Are you listening, Chief Jones? Are you there?
Yes, I am here. I have been listening and taking lots of notes.
Okay.
So I think what you suggest is next step seems appropriate. So we will be ready when you're ready.
Yes, we don't want to make it too late, but we need to get together as soon as possible. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Bondima, and thank you again for all your work on this. We're going to move forward and go to our closed portion of our meeting. So may I now have a motion to close the meeting as permitted by the Open Meetings Act to fulfill the board's administrative function in accordance with the Annotated Code of Maryland, General Provisions, Article Section 3-305B8, to consult with staff about pending or potential litigation.
So moved, Commissioner Sally.
Thank you, Commissioner Sally. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. Before we vote, do any members of the public object to closing the meeting? Hearing none, all in favor, Commissioner Bondima?
Yes.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes.
Commissioner Chinya?
Yes.
Commissioner Griffin?
Yes.
Commissioner McFadden?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Roberts?
Yes.
Commissioner Sally?
Yes.
And I am in favor. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you all.
Thank you. Where am I moving to right now?
All right, please jump. If you haven't, please jump over to the closed meeting link. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.